It's important to understand what map actions does behind the scenes though. So here I'm mapping to the increment and decrement actions, and actually this will create the following two methods for me. And I'm just writing it out so that you understand what map actions does here. We use map actions to get access to our actions, but in the end, what this map actions function or helper here does is it gives us the increment method, where we can then call this store dispatch increment. That is all this map actions function does. Now, increment here could of course also take a value like the by property or argument here, which you then can pass to increment to tell it by how much to increment or to increase this counter. And then we could call increment with, let's say, 100 here to increase it by 100 on each click instead of 1. That would be how we can do this, and map actions thankfully creates the method in just such a way that we are able to pass on an argument automatically. So we can pass 100 here with increment, and in store.js here where we get or when we call our action, where we can pass the second argument here too, which is named payload. You can name it whatever you like, but payload is something you'll see pretty often. Now, it's named payload because it's the payload of our action. And we can simply pass this on to our mutation, because it turns out mutations also not only get the state, but as a second argument, they may also get a payload. So we can then increment this by payload, like this. And if we save this and we click increment, you now see it gets increased by 200 actually, because we still duplicate it in our getter, or we take it times 2 in our getter, but you see at the number of clicks, we actually increase it by 100 upon each click. So this is how we can pass a payload. And of course, we can do the same here for our decrement function. So let me quickly do this, add the payload here too, and decrease it by the payload. And for that, I also need to expect the payload here on decrement. And then this allows me to go to the counter.view file, or before that, I should still pass this, of course, to the counter.view file and actually, let's say, decrease it by 50 on each click. And this will make sure it gets decreased by 100 because, again, I do multiply it with 2 in my getter, but on the clicks you see it gets reduced by 50 actually. So this is how I can pass a payload. Now, what if you want to pass more than one argument? What doesn't work is to add multiple arguments here. So let's say in the another counter where we use the async increment, we want to set the width or the size by which you want to increase it, for example, to 50. So increase it by 50 on each click. But then as a second argument, you also want to pass the duration for the async task. Right now, that is 1 second hard-coded into my code here. But if I want to set this manually, I can't pass it as a second argument, because that's not how dispatch works. Instead, what I can do is, I can simply pass an object here as an argument. And here, I can of course add as many properties as I want. For example, the by property to set the step by which I want to increase the counter, so by 50. And then let's say the duration property. Let's set it to 500 milliseconds. And of course, I can do the same for async decrement. Of course, then I have to adjust my actions here to also be able to fetch the payload here. That still only is one argument here, of course, but we know this argument now is object. So now I can simply commit payload by here. By is the step size, payload by. And down there, I want to set this with payload duration, because I know that I stored this in this property. And with that, if I save this again, you now see the top buttons work as before, but the bottom buttons, they take a little while before it takes effect. We see it actually is 50 regarding the step size, and timing wise, I'd say it feels like half a second, so it seems like the duration also works. And this is how I can pass a payload with my actions to my mutations, and I can either pass a string or a number, or if I need to pass more than one argument, I just pass an object as payload where I set up all my key value pairs for as many properties I want to use.